Excuse me. This says 22 to 37 pounds. Is there really going to be that much poop?
So, how many years can you drive without car insurance?
You'll hear more information about that from your supervisor. Any questions?
Is Candy Crush considered work time?
Is this the right way to do a middle part?
Hey, what's your favorite song in Frozen 2?
Benson Burger.
Yeah, quick question. Are 2 triple stackers enough for 1 person? No, asking for a friend.
Sharon wanted to know.
What?
Not like I've ever seen Frozen 2. Gross.
Asking for a friend.
Because that's a lot of poop.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us and tuning in today. Today we are continuing our worship series called Asking for a Friend. And to get into the question for today, I want to talk about rivalries that we are all too familiar with. For example, this one, Mac versus PC. How about this rivalry? Show of hands of you who are watching. How many of you are Mac people? How many of you are PC people? And I can bet you that if you're one or the other, likely you have disdain for the other person. Guys and girls, are you a Ford or a Chevy person? Oh. Or how about this one? In high school or middle school, are you an Xbox or are you a PS5? These are gaming consoles for all you that have no clue what they are. Or if you're a sports fan and you grew up in the 80s, how about this rivalry? USA versus Russia in hockey. Or NBA basketball, LeBron or Curry. Or if you are from Wisconsin or Minnesota, you know this one all too well, Green Bay versus the Vikings. But the rivalry that I want to talk about today goes back to 1962, and it's a rivalry between Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus. In 1962, Jack Nicklaus was new to the golf circuit, and it was his first year on the tour as a pro. And he happened to make the U.S. Open, and he was trailing the leaders up until the final round, in which he would end up tying Arnold Palmer. And the two would go on and play an 18-hole playoff, and do you know who won? The Golden Bear. The young up-and-coming Jack Nicklaus. He would beat Arnold Palmer, who was at the height of his golfing career. And that would begin a rivalry between these two that would rival any rivalry in sports today. Now, why do I start with this? I start with rivalries because there is a rivalry happening right now in life of faith. And it's gone on for a really long time, and I'll admit to you that as pastors, we have not talked about it enough. It's a rivalry that plays itself out in the curriculums taught at schools, heated school board meetings. It's a rivalry that is contentious at the political level, and it's a rivalry that is really complicated. But the truth of the matter is this: it's not really a rivalry at all. The two things that we are going to be talking about today are not even a threat to each other. As we continue this worship series, Asking for a Friend, the question we're going to wrestle with today goes like this: can I believe in science and be a Christian? In other words, is Christianity and science rivals? Because I don't know about you, but when you look around and you hear the debates that are happening in our schools, the debates that are happening in our political sphere of life, when you just simply pay attention to what is going on in our world today, you are either someone who believes in evolution, or you are someone who believes in the 6-day creation story that is found in the Bible. You are someone who supports genetic engineering or stem cell research, or you're someone who doesn't. You are someone who is for immunizations, or you are someone looking for religious exemptions from those immunizations. My senior year of college, I got the chance to go on a 4-week trip to Colorado for an intensive study for one of my biology classes. And for 4 weeks, we explored the entire state of Colorado. We got to see firsthand the beauty of Colorado and all of creation. Well, one day after a snowshoe hike into this deep ravine that opened up into this beautiful snow-covered lake that was surrounded by these gorgeous 14,000-foot mountains, we got back into the passenger van and the professor says, I don't know how you can take all this beauty in, study all the details of this beautiful place, and still believe there is a God. To which I immediately said, forgetting that we hadn't received a grade for the class yet, I said, I don't know how you can take all this in and study all the fine details of this beautiful place and not believe in a God. Let's just say it made for a very awkward 18-hour drive home to Wisconsin. It just seems to me that science and religion has had this rivalry that seems to have gone on forever. But here's the truth. It hasn't been going on forever. In fact, a couple hundred years after the death of Jesus, there was a guy by the name of Augustine. And he was a theologian and a philosopher, and he wrote these words: the perceived conflict between science and faith comes from a misunderstanding of science and a misinterpreting of the Bible. You see, this perceived rivalry didn't actually heat up until the 16th through the 18th century. That was the age of enlightenment. It was a time of scientific revolution, the age of reason, when all of a sudden there were all these scientific discoveries that were happening. And do you know what happened? It wasn't the science that began attacking Christianity. It was actually Christians who began feeling threatened by science. The worry was that if we find out the answers to too many of life's mysteries and questions, then we won't leave room for God. And thus began this rivalry that has been going on for hundreds of years, a rivalry that started by us Christians. And today I want to talk about the rivalry between Christianity and science, because honestly, I don't know if it's been helpful for us. And I don't think it reflects a faithful response to who God is and all God created in our world. And I see more Christians wasting so much time and energy on the science stuff when it just really doesn't matter. There's a famous thinker who is still alive today, who got his PhD in philosophy at Princeton. And he would go on to get his doctorate in mathematics and molecular biology. And he is considered the greatest thinker of our age. And his name is David Berlinski. And he writes these words: science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. And today I want to talk about this perceived rivalry between science and religion. And I want to leave you with 3 thoughts that can change how we look at this perceived rivalry. And the first thought is this: if you want to learn more about someone, you study what they created. For example, if you wanted to learn about Michelangelo, the artist, you can go to the history books and find out that he grew up in a small town in the center of Italy, and his dad was in the family business of banking that had gone on for generations, but during his lifetime, his dad killed the family business. You can find out that his mother died when he was just 6 years old and he had to go off and live with a nanny. You can learn all of that in history books. But to find out who he really was and is, you would have to go look at what he created. You would want to go to the Sistine Chapel and see the beautiful paintings. You might go to Florence and see the sculptures that Michelangelo created. Or how about sports figures? Tom Brady, for example. You could read a book about his life. You could find out that he grew up in California, and you could find out that when he was in high school as a freshman, he was the backup quarterback on the JV team, a team that didn't even win a game that year. You could find out that he played for the University of Michigan, and you could find out that in the NFL draft, he was the 199th person picked. He wasn't picked until the 6th round. But to really come to understand who Tom Brady is, you would want to watch him play. You would want to watch how he can read the defense and thread a pass into spots that no other quarterback can. You see, to really understand someone, you have to go and look at what they have created. Why wouldn't we do the same? The author of the book of Romans, Paul, he writes these words in Romans 1:20. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and the sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature. To understand who God really is, We have to look at what God created. Yes, we read the Bible and we hear about God's existence in the world and how God interacted with humans. But to understand all that God really is, we have to look at who and what God has created. The definition of science is this. Science is the systematic study of structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. Science is the study of the world around us that God has created. In other words, scientists study the world that God has created. Astronomers study the galaxies that God has created. Physicists study how God intricately put this whole world together. You could say that science is actually the act of devotion, studying deeper of who God is. Here is a picture taken from the new James Webb Space Telescope. This was taken this year. It's a space telescope which conducts infrared astronomy, and it's the largest optical telescope in space. And its low sensitivity allows us to see things at a distance that the Hubble telescope couldn't. This telescope allows us to see 13.6 billion light years away from us. It's the furthest we've ever seen into space. And I imagine that when King David put down some words to a song that he wrote out in the book of Psalms, I imagine that he was sitting on a rock on a hillside, looking out into the starry night when he wrote these words. The heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship. It's all God's creation. As he looked up into the sky, it was all God's handiwork. The scientists, Johann Kepler, back in the 16th and 17th century, developed theories of planetary motion. And as he was talking about the relationship between science and faith, he said this: we scientists, all we are doing is thinking God's thoughts after him. God is the creator and author of all. Scientists are simply thinking God's thoughts after him. So back to our original question, is science and Christianity rivals? I don't think so. Because the truth is, if you want to learn about someone, you study what they created. The second thought I want you to ponder today is this. I want to suggest that studying science makes God bigger. When we are little kids and we grew up in church and we went to Sunday school, we learned that God created the land, created the water, created the sky, created the wind, the birds, the animals, the rocks, and the trees. And the world seemed really small when we were kids. But as you grew up, you realized that the world is so much bigger. When I studied biology, I learned that our bodies are made up of some 37 trillion cells. We learned that our galaxy is some 52,000 light years long. We study science, we learn that there are 33,000 different kinds of fish species. You learn about tectonic plates and that when they move over thousands and millions of years, they create mountains and volcanoes. When we study science, it actually makes God bigger. Some of you have had the joy of being in the doctor's office and seeing this. This is an ultrasound. And I'll never forget the first time I sat in the doctor's office and they had that machine joystick thingy over my wife's belly, and I just couldn't believe it. I was in awe that inside of my wife was this growing child and I had something to do with it. I was in awe in what God was creating. I was in awe that God gave people the ability and the minds to think up these machines that can see inside my wife's belly so that we could see the child that has yet to be born. I was in awe of all of it. That's what science does. It just makes God bigger. I mean, David wrote in Psalm 65, he said, the whole earth is filled with awe at your wonders. I mean, think about this. Scientists have figured out that this planet has been around for some 4.5 billion years. It took 1 million years for humans to evolve. That is incredible, and it makes God really big. And you might be saying, well, Pastor, what about the creation story in the Bible? The story said that God created all of us and everything that exists in just 6 days. And if that is what you're thinking, I want you to know this. I believe in my Bible with all my heart. But we have to put the Bible in the right place when it comes to faith and science. And here's the thing about the Bible. The Bible tells us who created, not how it was created. And the problem for us Christians is when we read the Bible as a science book. The Bible was never written as a science book, nor was it ever intended to be read as a science book. The Bible was solely written to point us to who, church? Jesus, and a God who is behind the creating. Does it matter to my faith in God if everything was created by a big bang? No, it doesn't matter one bit. Can I believe in God and evolution? Absolutely, we can. Remember, science is in the business of explaining how things were created. The Bible is all about the who behind the creation. When we apply science to God, when we study science, it makes God bigger. And lastly, I want to suggest this. Studying science makes God's love bigger. When you were a kid, do you remember eating off the kids' menu? Do you remember that? The kids' menu had maybe 4 or 5 options, corn dog or cheeseburger or macaroni and cheese or chicken strips. And it was fine when you were a kid. But as you got older, you started to realize just how big and vast the adult menu was, right? All these options for you. And that one day your parent says to you, order whatever you want. So you order a triple cheeseburger with a large fry and a side of cheese curds, and you feel sick when you leave the restaurant. You see, when we are kids, the lessons that we learn about God are rather simple, aren't they? They're sort of like kids' menu version. We learn that God loves us. We are really important to God and that we are to love other people. But as we get older, still holding on to the kids' menu, we learn that the world is a bit more complicated. The world is filled with hurt and pain and suffering. That the world is interconnected and the world is a whole lot more broken than we ever imagined when we were a little kid. But we still hold on to that kid's menu. That kid's version of the story of God that says, hey, you're loved and you are important. When what we really need as an adult is a bigger version of that story that tells our adult brains, that works with our adult minds to show us how God has placed us at the center, that we are at the center of his creation. I mean, David wrote these words in Psalm 8. He said, when I look at the sky and see the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars you set in place, what are mere mortals that you should think about them? Human beings that you should care for him. Then he goes on, yet you made them only a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. You gave them charge of everything you made, putting all things under their authority, our authority. The Bible tells us the story of God. But it's science that reveals to us that God loved us so much that God created us in this amazing intricacy. With 206 bones that work together, he created us in a way that every 15 seconds your body creates some 27 million new cells. He created you in such a way that you have 60 to 100,000 miles of blood vessels running through your body. And if you took those blood vessels and stretched them out, you would have enough vessels to wrap around the earth 3 times. Science teaches us that God loved us so much that he created us in a way that our blood will clot when we cut ourselves. Science reveals that God loved us so much that God created us in such a way that when we are out in the sun, our bodies can collect vitamins, like vitamin D from the sun. And maybe the greatest show of love is that God created us with minds. Think about it. God gave doctors minds so that they could adjust your broken arm so that it can heal correctly. It gave us minds so that when it gets down to 29 degrees, think about it, last night it got down to 29 degrees. God created engineers who created furnaces that heat our homes all winter long. God gave engineers the ability to build airplanes so that when we are sick of the cold in the north, we can head to the south in the winter. God gave scientists minds to create MRIs and CAT scan machines. Doctors the ability to laser surgery on cancer spots and on our eyes. Studying science reminds us that we are the center. We are the pinnacle of God's creation. Here's what science does. Studying science makes God's love bigger, a whole lot bigger. We all love rivalries. iPhone, Android. If you grew up a sports fan, Larry Bird versus Magic Johnson. But I'm going to stick with my all-time favorite rivalry, Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus. That began in 1962. And in 2016, Arnold Palmer passed away. And the day he passed away, Nicholas said this: "He was one of my best friends, closest friends, and he was for a long, long time. He was always a friend. I always had his back. He always had my back. He did so much for so many." Rather than a rivalry, maybe a better example of a relationship between science and faith, rather than rivals, what if we look at them as just friends? And we have a God who continues to create, and scientists who continue to study what God is creating. They are always pointing to God who created it all. The Bible points to who created. Science just simply tells us how. Rather than a rivalry, a better way to say it is this: science and faith, they're friends. For that we say, thanks be to God. Amen.